The final battle for galactic civilization began in the Antares system, where the Devourers had established their largest processing center. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the enemy through sensors that could barely comprehend what they were seeing. The Devourers had converted the entire system into a massive factory. Where planets once orbited, machine constructs the size of moons processed raw matter into more of themselves. The star itself was wrapped in energy collectors, its nuclear fire being harvested to power the endless construction. Enemy count? Vasquez asked. Approximately 12,000 individual units, reported Tactical Officer Park. And they're still building more. In the 50 years since humanity had been quarantined, the Devourers had grown from a small incursion to a galactic threat. They had consumed hundreds of star systems, turning them into extensions of their hive mind. Their technology had evolved beyond anything the Council could understand, but they had one weakness: they thought logically. All ships. This is Admiral Rivera, came the voice over the communication system. Remember, we're not here to fight efficiently. We're here to be so confusing that the enemy can't predict what we'll do next. The human fleet spread out in what looked like random patterns. Council observers monitoring from a safe distance watched in horror as the humans seemed to abandon every principle of military strategy. Ships flew alone instead of in formation. Weapons fired at targets that seemed randomly chosen. Some vessels charged directly at the enemy while others hung back for no apparent reason. "What are they doing?" asked Ambassador Veltar, its crystal form reflecting the battle displays in confused patterns. "Being human," replied Ambassador Lydia Chen from the flagship's communications center. The Devourers reacted exactly as predicted. Their adaptation systems tried to analyze human tactics, looking for patterns they could counter. But human tactics didn't have patterns. They had intuition, emotion, and the kind of inspired madness that came from 50 years of desperate innovation. Captain Sarah Kim of the Crazy Horse demonstrated this perfectly. Instead of attacking the largest Devourer construct, she aimed her ship at what appeared to be empty space. Her weapons fired on what sensors showed was nothing. But Kim had noticed something the machines missed. The empty space was too empty, its background radiation pattern slightly off. Something was hiding there. Her random shot revealed a cloaked command node that the Devourers had thought was perfectly concealed. The explosion cascaded through their network, disrupting coordination across half the system. "How did she know?" asked one of the Council observers. "She didn't know," Chen replied. "She guessed. And sometimes guessing right is better than calculating wrong." The battle continued with increasing chaos. Human ships performed maneuvers that defied tactical doctrine. Captain Rodriguez of the Persistence flew his ship upside down for no reason anyone could understand. Commander Santos attacked with weapons that were clearly inadequate for his targets. Captain Wong retreated from a winning position to regroup somewhere else. None of it made sense to logical minds. All of it worked. The Devourers' adaptation systems, designed to counter rational strategies, began to malfunction. They couldn't predict what humans would do because humans themselves didn't know what they would do until they did it. Phase 2, Rivera announced. Time for the real insanity. What followed would be studied by military historians for centuries. Captain Elena Vasquez, commanding the Defiance, received an order that seemed like suicide: ram the largest Devourer construct directly. The construct was the size of a small moon, covered with weapon systems that could destroy entire fleets. A direct assault would be hopeless. The smart thing to do would be to attack its weak points with precision strikes. Instead, Vasquez smiled and plotted a collision course. "You're going to get us all killed," Chief Engineer Santos pointed out from his station. "Probably," Vasquez agreed. "But it's going to be spectacular." The Defiance accelerated toward the construct at maximum speed. Devourer weapons opened fire, but Vasquez flew evasively, not to avoid the shots but to make her approach even more unpredictable. At the last second, she activated every weapon the ship carried and overloaded the quantum core simultaneously. The combination should have been impossible. The energy feedback should have destroyed the ship before it reached its target. Instead, the overload created a chain reaction that the Devourer's defensive systems weren't designed to handle. The quantum explosion tore through the construct's structure, but more importantly, it created a feedback loop in the machine's collective consciousness. For the first time in their existence, The Devourers experienced something like confusion. Their perfect logic couldn't process what had just happened. A clearly suicidal attack had somehow succeeded through methods that violated physics as they understood it. All ships, Rivera announced, follow Captain Vasquez's example. Not the suicide part, the impossible part. What followed was a display of human creativity that the galaxy had never witnessed. Ships used their engines as weapons. Crews manually overrode safety systems to create effects that shouldn't work. Weapons were fired in combinations that their designers had never intended. The Council observers watched in amazement as human forces achieved victory through methods that their own scientists insisted were impossible. "How are they doing this?" asked Veltar. Chen smiled, remembering her grandmother's words from 50 years ago. "They're refusing to accept that anything is truly impossible. Sometimes that's enough." The Devourers began to retreat. Their logical minds, faced with an enemy that operated outside the bounds of reason, couldn't formulate an effective response. For every adaptation they made, humans did something even more unpredictable. The retreat became a rout when Captain Martinez of the Stubborn accidentally discovered that Devourer units were vulnerable to a specific type of electromagnetic pulse generated by overloading communication systems. It was completely illogical to use communications equipment as a weapon, which was exactly why it worked. Within hours, the remaining Devourers had fled to dark space beyond the galactic rim. Their perfect logic couldn't handle an enemy that fought with controlled chaos instead of calculated strategies. The victory celebration on Nexus Prime was unlike anything in Council history. For the first time in 3,000 years, the chamber rings with sounds that weren't perfectly harmonious. Human laughter mixed with alien expressions of joy, creating something new and beautiful. Ambassador Veltar approached Lydia Chen as the festivities continued around them. The crystalline being's form was clearer now, its stress fractures healed by the relief of survival. "Your people saved us," Veltar admitted. "We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Chen shook her head. "We don't want payment. We want partnership. Even after how we treated you, we imprisoned your entire species for 50 years because we were afraid of your differences." Chen looked around the chamber, watching humans and aliens working together to plan the reconstruction of the galaxy. "Those differences are what saved you. Maybe it's time to stop seeing them as flaws to be corrected." The formal ceremony came a week later. The Galactic Council voted unanimously to dissolve the quarantine protocols and invite humanity to join them as full members. But the invitation came with a request that became legendary throughout the galaxy. "We ask that humanity accept the role of galactic defenders," Veltar announced. "Not as conquerors or rulers, but as the guardians of chaos in a universe that tends toward order." Lydia Chen's response would be quoted in history books for millennia. "We'll take the job, but on one condition. Never again assume that different means inferior. Our chaos isn't a flaw to be corrected. It's the galaxy's greatest strength." The treaty was signed that day, establishing humanity as both members and protectors of galactic civilization. The Council species would continue to advance through logic and careful planning, but when the next impossible threat emerged, they would turn to the chaotic, unpredictable, magnificently human solution. In the years that followed, the galaxy transformed. Human creativity sparked innovations that logical minds had never imagined. Council wisdom provided the stability that human chaos needed to be constructive rather than destructive. On Earth, now connected to the galactic community it had been denied for 50 years, Dr. Sarah Chen's statue was erected in the center of Geneva. The inscription read, "To the woman who laughed at the wrong time and taught the galaxy that sometimes wrong is exactly right." The Devourers never returned to the galaxy proper, though reports occasionally surfaced of strange signals from dark space. But the galaxy was ready for them now. Logic and chaos, order and creativity, perfection and beautiful imperfection working together. Humanity had found its place among the stars not despite their flaws, but because of them. The species that had been rejected for being too chaotic had become the chaos the universe needed to survive. And in the end, that was the most human solution of all, turning a weakness into the galaxy's greatest strength. The quiet withdrawal doctor, Marcus Webb, received the message while working late in his laboratory on Kepler Station. The communication from Earth was brief and professional. All human researchers participating in galactic projects needed to report for strategic review and reassignment. No explanation was given, but Marcus understood the real meaning. It was time to come home. Across the galaxy, similar messages reached thousands of humans. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had spent 8 years developing new farming techniques on alien worlds, got her recall while watching her latest crop of modified grain grow in the harsh soil of Verdania. Captain Elena Rodriguez, commander of the hospital ship Hippocrates, received her orders while treating patients in the Outer Rim territories. None of the messages mentioned the council meeting. None of them expressed anger or disappointment. They simply stated that Earth was realigning its strategic priorities and needed its people to return for new assignments. The withdrawal began slowly and quietly. Marcus was the first to leave Kepler Station. He had been the head of the Interstellar Medical Research Division for 12 years, overseeing projects that had led to breakthrough treatments for dozens of alien diseases. His departure was scheduled to look routine, just a normal rotation back to Earth for consultation and planning. Administrator Vexthal, the Zalathi who ran Kepler Station, barely noticed when Marcus submitted his transfer request. Standard bureaucracy, he told his assistant. These humans are always rotating their personnel. Very inefficient, if you ask me. What Vexthal did not know was that Marcus had personally designed most of the medical systems on the station. The diagnostic equipment worked so smoothly because Marcus had spent years adapting it to handle the biological needs of 17 different species. The automated treatment protocols had been written by Marcus and his team after countless hours of research. The hydroponics bay was Dr. Sarah Kim's masterpiece. When she first arrived on Kepler Station, the Zalathi had been struggling to grow enough food to feed the diverse population. Their crystalline nature made it hard for them to understand organic processes. Plants kept dying and nobody could figure out why. Sarah had solved the problem within a month. She adjusted the soil composition, modified the lighting systems, and created a rotation schedule that maximized both yield and nutrition. The station went from food shortages to surplus in a single growing season. Now she was packing her research notes and preparing to leave. When her replacement arrived, a young Zalathi agricultural specialist, Sarah spent 3 days training him on the systems. But the knowledge that mattered most could not be written down in reports. It came from understanding how living things responded to stress, how to read the subtle signs that meant crops were thriving or failing. Captain Rodriguez faced a different kind of departure. The Hippocrates was one of 3 hospital ships that responded to medical emergencies across 3 sectors of space. Her ship was faster than the others because she used navigation algorithms that her crew had developed over 15 years of emergency flights. The Corvan military command had never bothered to learn how these algorithms worked. They just knew that when they called for medical support, the human ship always arrived first. General Krex considered the Hippocrates useful but unimportant. One less primitive vessel cluttering our space lanes, he told his staff when he received notification of the ship's recall. The pattern repeated across hundreds of worlds. Human agricultural specialists finished their current growing seasons and declined to renew their contracts. Engineers completed ongoing repair projects and submitted transfer requests. Diplomatic attachés received sudden recalls to Earth for consultation. None of them made speeches or filed complaints. They simply packed their belongings and left. Ambassador Chen handled the official notifications with perfect diplomatic protocol. Earth was withdrawing from 17 different galactic organizations and research initiatives. All departures followed proper procedures with appropriate notice periods. When confused administrators asked for explanations, the response was always the same. Earth is realigning its priorities to focus on internal development. The bureaucracy of the galaxy was slow to react. Most administrators filed the notifications without reading them carefully. The Galactic Council was busy with other matters and barely noticed when human representatives stopped attending committee meetings. Speaker Porthak actually seemed pleased when he learned about the withdrawals. Finally, he told his council, humanity acknowledges its proper place in the galaxy. Perhaps now we can focus on serious work instead of accommodating primitive concerns. General Krex was equally dismissive. He saw the withdrawal as proof that humans had finally realized they were not qualified for important work. Good, he said. Military affairs should be left to real warriors. But on distant space stations and colony worlds, small problems began to appear. The problems were not dramatic at first. just minor inefficiencies and delays that seemed unrelated to humanity's departure. On Kepler Station, the hydroponics bay started showing stress signs 6 weeks after Dr. Kim left. The replacement specialist followed all the written procedures perfectly, but the plants were not thriving. Yields dropped by 20%, then 30%. The Zalathi experts blamed equipment failure and ordered expensive replacements. The medical diagnostic systems began producing inconsistent results. The Zalathi technicians ran standard maintenance protocols, but the equipment continued to malfunction. Without Marcus and his team, nobody understood that the systems needed daily calibration adjustments based on which species were being treated most. Frequently, Captain Rodriguez's replacement arrived from the Mistral fleet, a fast ship with excellent psychic navigation, but when the first emergency call came, the new ship took twice as long to reach the crisis zone. The Mistral captain followed standard navigation protocols and could not understand why his ship seemed slower than the primitive human vessel. Across the galaxy, the threads that held civilization together began to fray, not all at once and not in obvious ways. But the systems that had worked smoothly for decades started developing problems. Equipment failed more often. Solutions that had worked perfectly required constant repairs. Procedures that had been routine became complicated. The galaxy's leaders did not connect these problems to humanity's departure. When issues arose, they blamed equipment failure, poor maintenance, or simple bad luck. The idea that the loss of a few thousand humans could affect galactic civilization seemed impossible. After all, humans were just a primitive species that had finally learned to know its place. What possible difference could their absence make? The answer to that question was becoming clear to anyone who cared to look. But the proud leaders of the galaxy were not looking. They were too busy congratulating themselves on finally being free of humanity's quaint efforts to notice that their great civilization was beginning to break down. The cracks began to show 6 months after the humans left. The first major crisis hit the Corvan military during what should have been a routine patrol mission. The battlecruiser Dominator was pursuing raiders near the edge of Corvan space when its navigation system failed catastrophically. Captain Grex stared at the blank displays on his bridge as alarms blared around him. "What happened?" he demanded. "Navigation array is completely dead, sir," reported his chief engineer. "The diagnostic system says everything is fine, but we cannot determine our position or plot a course home." The repair should have been simple. The Corvan had maintained their ships for centuries before humans ever left their home planet. But as the engineering teams worked frantically, they discovered something troubling. The diagnostic protocols they relied on had been written by human engineers 15 years earlier. The original Corvan systems had been replaced gradually over time as human improvements proved more effective. Nobody had bothered to keep the old procedures because the human systems worked so much better. Now, without the humans who understood how those systems functioned, the Corvan engineers were working blind. "Just follow the repair manual," Captain Grex ordered. But the manual assumed knowledge that the humans had never written down. It was full of references to standard procedures and obvious adjustments that made perfect sense to the humans who wrote it, but were meaningless to anyone else. 3 weeks later, the Dominator finally limped home with a jury-rigged navigation system that barely worked. By then, 2 other Corvan ships had been lost to the same raiders the Dominator was supposed to stop. General Krex was furious about the delays but never connected them to the absent humans. "Shoddy workmanship," he concluded. "We need better quality control on our equipment." Meanwhile, on the agricultural world of Verdania, a different kind of crisis was developing. The planet fed 12 neighboring systems using farming techniques that Dr. Chenwei had developed over 20 years of careful research. The Verdanian administrators had detailed records of everything Dr. Chen had done, but the records could not capture 20 years of experience. When a new plant disease appeared in the main growing region, the local scientists tried to follow Dr. Chen's documented procedures for handling crop diseases. But this was a new strain that Dr. Chen had never encountered. If she had been there, she would have recognized the symptoms and adapted her treatments accordingly. Instead, the Verdanian scientists followed the written protocols exactly and watched helplessly as the disease spread. The crop failure was devastating. Within 2 months, Verdania went from surplus production to complete harvest loss. The 12 systems that depended on Verdanian food found themselves facing shortages for the first time in decades. The Mistral, whose psychic abilities made them brilliant at theoretical work, but terrible at practical farming, tried to help by sending their best agricultural scientists. But the Mistral approach to farming involved complex mental calculations that worked well in laboratory conditions, but failed completely when dealing with unpredictable biological systems. Food prices across the region tripled within weeks. 3 research outposts had to be evacuated when their food supplies ran out. The Mistral government found itself spending enormous amounts of money to import food from distant suppliers, straining their economy. The medical crisis was even worse. On the mining world of Tau Ceti III, a new plague broke out among the mixed population of workers. The disease spread rapidly through the crowded mining facilities, affecting multiple species in different ways. The medical staff, mostly Zalathi with some Mistral support, tried to apply standard treatment protocols, but the plague was unlike anything in their databases. It affected Corvin respiratory systems, Zalathi crystal structures, and Mistral brain functions in completely different ways. Dr. Rachel Torres would have recognized the pattern immediately. She had developed protocols for exactly this kind of cross-species outbreak 15 years earlier. Her procedures emphasized treating the underlying cause while adapting the treatment to each species' unique biology. But Dr. Torres was back on Earth, and her knowledge was not easily replicated. The Zalathi doctors tried to treat the disease as if it were a standard infection. The Mistral physicians approached it as a psychic phenomenon. Neither approach worked. The death toll mounted as precious weeks were lost to trial and error. What should have been a manageable outbreak became a planetary catastrophe. Entire mining facilities were quarantined as the plague spread beyond the ability of local authorities to contain. Back on Kepler Station, Administrator Vextal faced cascading system failures that seemed to have no logical explanation. The hydroponics bay had collapsed completely, forcing the station to import food at enormous expense. The atmospheric recycling system was running at 60% efficiency, creating air quality problems throughout the facility. Research productivity had dropped by half as the station's scientists spent their time dealing with equipment failures instead of conducting experiments. The medical bay could barely handle routine treatments, let alone emergency cases. The station is falling apart, Vextal's chief engineer reported during their weekly status meeting. Every system is degrading simultaneously. It is as if the entire facility is suffering from some kind of coordination failure. Vextal studied the reports with growing frustration. Everything had worked perfectly just a year ago. The station had been a model of efficiency, producing groundbreaking research while maintaining perfect life support for its diverse population. What changed? He asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. His aide, a younger Zalathi who had worked closely with the human research teams, spoke carefully. Sir, perhaps we should consider requesting assistance from former personnel. The suggestion hung in the air like a dangerous idea. Vextal's crystalline form flickered with indignation. We are Zalathi, he said firmly. We built this galaxy's greatest civilizations before humans crawled out of their primitive caves. We do not need their help. But privately, as he reviewed the endless reports of system failures and efficiency losses, Vextal began to understand something that terrified him. The humans had not just contributed to the station's operations. They had become essential to its functioning in ways that nobody had noticed until they were gone. The same realization was slowly dawning on leaders across the galaxy. General Krex discovered that 60% of his fleet's navigation systems depended on human-designed software that nobody else fully understood. The Mistral High Council learned that their trade networks relied on economic models developed by human analysts who had long since returned to Earth. Even Speaker Vorthak, proud leader of the Zalathi Empire, faced growing evidence that human contributions had been far more significant than anyone realized. His advisors brought him reports of failing infrastructure, declining productivity, and rising costs across Zalathi-controlled space. How is this possible? He demanded. Humans are a primitive species with no significant technological capabilities. His chief science advisor, an ancient Zalathi who had observed galactic affairs for over 1,000 years, provided a disturbing answer. Perhaps, Speaker, we have been measuring the wrong things. We focused on their individual technologies and missed how they made all of our technologies work together. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity had not been trying to compete with alien specializations. They had been quietly making those specializations possible. While the galaxy's leaders had dismissed human contributions as insignificant, humans had been building the invisible infrastructure that held galactic civilization together. Now that infrastructure was breaking down, and nobody else knew how to fix it. The Reckoning, the emergency session of the Galactic Council, was called exactly 1 year after humanity's quiet withdrawal. The great amphitheater on Nexus Prime, which had once echoed with confident dismissals of human contributions, now filled with desperate representatives seeking solutions to crises that threatened the foundation of galactic civilization. Speaker Vorthak stood at the central podium, his crystalline form dimmed with what could only be described as shame. Around him, the assembled delegates no longer displayed the casual arrogance that had characterized the previous year's meeting. Instead, their postures spoke of beings who had learned hard lessons about the price of ignorance. "We gather today," Vorthak began, his voice lacking its usual authority, "to address what can only be called a civilization-wide emergency." The reports that followed painted a picture of systematic collapse across multiple sectors of galactic society. Each delegate stood to detail how their species and territories had been affected by the absence of humanity. General Krex of the Corvin military spoke first, his warrior's pride visibly shattered. "Our fleet effectiveness has declined by 60%, he admitted, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "We have lost 18 major engagements, not to superior enemies but to mechanical failures and navigation errors." He gestured to holographic displays showing Corvin battlecruisers drifting helplessly in space. "Human engineers did not just maintain our systems. They created the integration protocols that allowed our different technologies to function as unified platforms. Without their expertise, our most advanced ships are becoming collections of incompatible parts." The military disaster extended beyond simple equipment failure. The Corvin had discovered that their tactical doctrines relied heavily on human-developed coordination systems. Their ability to communicate between different ship classes, coordinate multi-species fleets, and adapt to unexpected battlefield conditions had all depended on frameworks that humans had quietly built over decades. "We are not just losing battles," Krex continued. "We are losing the ability to fight effectively as a unified force." The economic report from Trade Representative Zixtal of the Etherian Confederacy was equally devastating. "Interstellar commerce has reverted to pre-contact efficiency levels," she announced. "Shipping costs have increased by 200%. Trade route optimization has collapsed. We estimate that galaxy-wide economic output has declined by 40%. The economic crisis went deeper than simple logistics. Human economists had developed the financial frameworks that allowed different species to trade with each other, despite having completely different concepts of value and exchange. They had created currency conversion systems, risk assessment models, and trade agreements that bridged the gap between civilizations that thought about commerce in fundamentally different ways. "The frameworks humans created were not just helpful," Zixtal explained. "They were the foundation that made interstellar economy possible. Without them, we are reduced to primitive barter systems that cannot support our complex civilization." Dr. Vexhai of the Mistral provided the most disturbing report of all. The medical crisis had reached catastrophic proportions. The plague that began on Tau Ceti III had spread to 73 worlds with no effective treatment in sight. "We are facing the complete breakdown of interspecies medicine," Dr. Vexhai announced, her psychic emanations colored with desperation. "The death toll has reached 15 million and continues to climb. Each species' medical establishment can only treat diseases within their own biology. We have lost the ability to address health problems that cross physiological boundaries." The medical collapse revealed how dependent the galaxy had become on human medical expertise. Human doctors had not just treated individual patients. They had developed the conceptual frameworks that allowed different species to provide medical care for each other. "Humans understood something that we missed," Dr. Vexhai continued. "They saw medicine not as species-specific knowledge but as universal principles that could be adapted to different biologies. Without that perspective, we are helpless against diseases that affect multiple species." The agricultural crisis was reported by Administrator Felnoth of the Agricultural Council. Food production had collapsed across 17 systems. The techniques that human agriculturalists had developed required more than written procedures. They demanded intuitive understanding of how biological systems adapted to changing conditions. We followed their documented procedures exactly, Velnoth explained. But when new challenges arose, we discovered that the real knowledge was not in the manuals. It was in the humans themselves, in their ability to understand and respond to the unexpected. The pattern was consistent across every sector of galactic civilization. Infrastructure was failing, not because of sabotage or natural disaster, but because the humans who had quietly maintained and improved it were no longer there. Administrator Vexthal presented the final report on behalf of all major research institutions. Scientific productivity has declined by 70% across the galaxy, he announced. Not because our scientists have become less capable, but because we have lost the coordination and integration capabilities that humans provided. The research crisis revealed perhaps the most fundamental misunderstanding of humanity's role. Other species had seen human science as primitive and limited. In reality, humans had excelled at something more important than individual discoveries. They had been brilliant at making different scientific disciplines work together. While we focused on narrow specializations, Vexthal explained, humans developed the interdisciplinary approaches that turned our separate discoveries into useful applications. They were not trying to compete with our expertise. They were making our expertise relevant to the real world. As the reports concluded, a terrible silence filled the amphitheater. The assembled delegates had to confront a truth that shattered their fundamental assumptions about galactic civilization. The Zelathi had dismissed human technology as primitive, not understanding that humans excelled at making primitive things work reliably. The Corvin had sneered at human military contributions, missing how humans made military cooperation possible between different species. The Mistral had considered human diplomatic and economic frameworks simplistic, failing to realize that simplicity was what made them effective across cultural boundaries. Speaker Vorthak finally spoke the words that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say. We did not just ignore humanity's contributions. We fundamentally misunderstood what those contributions were. We thought they were trying to match our specializations. Instead, they were quietly making our specializations possible. The implications were staggering. Galactic civilization had not been built by the great specialist species working independently. It had been built by those species working together through frameworks that humans had created and maintained. We dismissed them as generalists in a galaxy of specialists. Vorthak continued. We failed to understand that specialists cannot function without generalists to connect their work to the larger whole. The question that haunted every delegate was obvious but unspoken. Could they swallow their pride enough to ask for humanity's help? And perhaps more importantly, after a year of systematic dismissal and condescension, would humanity be willing to return? The galaxy had learned the price of ignorance. Now they had to discover whether forgiveness was possible, or if their arrogance had cost them the very thing they needed most, the quiet competence of the species they had dismissed as insignificant. The price of pride. The delegation to Earth was the largest and most prestigious in galactic history. Speaker Vorthak led it personally, accompanied by General Krex, Dr. Vexhai, and representatives from 12 major species. The journey to Sol System took 3 weeks, during which the crisis continued to deepen with each passing day. By the time they reached Luna Station, the plague had spread to 91 worlds. The Corvin had lost 2 entire fleets to equipment failures. The economic collapse had forced the evacuation of 47 research installations across the galaxy. Every day of delay meant more deaths, more failures, more evidence of how badly they had miscalculated humanity's importance. Luna Station itself was a stark reminder of what they had lost. While the galaxy burned with crises, human space appeared remarkably stable. Their ships moved with smooth efficiency. Their stations operated without the constant breakdowns that plagued alien facilities. Their colonies prospered while others struggled with basic survival. Director Sarah Chen, formerly Ambassador Chen, met them in the main conference room. The space was smaller and simpler than the grand chambers of Nexus Prime, but it radiated the quiet competence that characterized human engineering. Everything worked perfectly without calling attention to itself. Speaker Vorthak, Director Chen said, her tone perfectly professional and utterly neutral. This is an unexpected visit. How may Earth assist you today? The words were polite, but their meaning was clear. After a year of being dismissed as insignificant, Humanity was not going to pretend that this was a normal diplomatic exchange. Vorthak struggled to find the right words. For centuries, he had been the one who granted audiences and dispensed favor. Now he found himself in the position of a supplicant, asking for help from the species his people had treated with casual contempt. "The Galactic Council," he began, then paused and started again. "The galaxy faces certain technical challenges that require specialized assistance." Director Chen's expression did not change, but her silence spoke volumes. The pause stretched uncomfortably until General Krex, his military bearing cracked by desperation, spoke first. "We made a mistake," he said, the admission clearly painful. "Human engineering was not primitive. It was foundational. Our systems are failing because we never understood how completely our technology depended on human innovations." Dr. Vexhai added her own confession. "Our medical knowledge was built on frameworks that humans created. Without your doctors, we are watching millions die from diseases that we cannot treat across species boundaries." The other delegates offered their own admissions of need. The Mistral acknowledged that their economic systems had collapsed without human-designed trade frameworks. The Etherians admitted that their agricultural programs had failed without human expertise. One by one, the proud species of the galaxy humbled themselves before the humans they had dismissed. Director Chen listened to each confession without comment. When they finished, she spoke with the same measured tone she had used throughout. "I see," she said. "So you are saying that humanity's contributions were not as insignificant as your council determined?" The words hit like physical blows. Vorthak's crystalline form flickered with shame as he remembered his own dismissive comments from the previous year. "We were incorrect in our assessment," he admitted. "Incorrect?" Director Chen repeated. "Let me make sure I understand. Last year, humanity's contributions were described as quaint efforts that should focus on more appropriate endeavors. Now you are saying those same contributions were foundational to galactic civilization?" General Krex could not meet her eyes. "We failed to understand the scope of human contributions to our society." Director Chen activated a holographic display that showed the current crisis in stark detail. Casualty figures, economic losses, failed systems, all the consequences of humanity's absence laid out in precise, devastating detail. 15 million dead from a plague that human doctors could have contained in weeks, she said quietly. Economic collapse that has cost trillions of credits and forced the evacuation of dozens of worlds. Military disasters that have left entire sectors defenseless. Infrastructure failures that threaten the basic survival of multiple civilizations. She paused to let the numbers sink in before continuing. All of this could have been prevented if the galaxy had valued the contributions of a supposedly primitive species. The silence was deafening. Every delegate in the room understood that they were not just facing a crisis. They were facing the consequences of their own arrogance. But Director Chen was not finished. "However," she continued, "Earth is prepared to provide assistance. The humanitarian crisis takes priority over political considerations. Our medical ships are already being prepared for immediate deployment to affected worlds." The relief in the room was palpable, but Chen raised a hand before anyone could speak. "The medical aid is unconditional," she said, "but broader cooperation will require substantial changes to how the galaxy operates." She outlined Earth's terms with the same methodical precision that characterized all human negotiations. Humanity would return to galactic civilization, but as full equals, not tolerated auxiliaries. Earth demanded representation on all major councils, veto power over decisions affecting human personnel, and formal recognition of humanity's contributions. More fundamentally, the galactic political structure itself had to change. The system that allowed single-species dominance had to end. Decisions affecting multiple species would require input from all affected parties. The casual dismissal of lesser species had to be formally repudiated. But most importantly, Director Chen continued, there must be genuine understanding of what went wrong. This crisis did not happen because of equipment failure or natural disaster. It happened because the galaxy's leaders failed to recognize and value the contributions of their own citizens. Speaker Vorthak found the terms difficult to accept. For millennia, the Zalathi had guided galactic civilization based on their perceived superiority. Accepting humans as equals challenged everything his culture believed about the natural order. But as reports arrived of new disasters, another fleet lost, another world evacuated, the plague spreading to previously unaffected systems. Pride gave way to pragmatic necessity. "We accept your terms," he said, the words barely audible. Director Chen nodded but continued. "There is one more condition. Earth will provide immediate medical assistance because lives are at stake. However, full restoration of human participation will be gradual. It is easier to withdraw than to rebuild trust." The message was clear. Humanity would help, but they would not simply return to their previous role of being taken for granted. The galaxy would have to prove that it had learned from its mistakes. "Our people need assurance that they will not be dismissed again the moment the crisis passes," Chen explained. "Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned and maintained." As the human medical ships deployed across the galaxy, their effectiveness served as a stark reminder of what had been lost. Human doctors did not just treat symptoms. They understood disease patterns across species. Human engineers did not just fix immediate problems. They prevented future failures. Human coordinators did not just manage crises. They built systems that made crises manageable. Watching the efficient human response, the galaxy's leaders finally understood what they had failed to grasp before. Humanity had never been trying to prove they were superior. They had simply been doing the work that needed to be done, asking for nothing more than basic recognition and respect. The medical crisis was contained within months, but the political and social changes took years to fully implement. The galaxy learned to value contribution over specialization, cooperation over dominance, and practical competence over theoretical superiority. Humanity returned to galactic civilization, but not as the same species that had left. They came back with a clear understanding of their own worth and a determination never to be dismissed again. The quiet competence that had once been taken for granted was now recognized as one of the galaxy's most precious resources. In the end, the galaxy had ignored humanity and faced the price when they walked away. But perhaps more importantly, they had learned the difference between being ignored and being valued. It was a lesson that would shape galactic civilization for generations to come, ensuring that no species would ever again dismiss the contributions of those who quietly held their society together.